A release note is not usually a strategic document, but buried in the WebStorm 2026.2 changelog, JetBrains recorded something that deserves more scrutiny than it has received. The IDE now speaks the Agent-Client Protocol, an open, vendor-neutral standard for communicating with AI coding agents. Not JetBrains' own agent, not an exclusive partnership with one model provider, any agent that implements the specification. On its surface, this is plumbing. In practice, it is a bet that the market for coding agents will be settled by interoperability rather than by ecosystems that hold their users in place. To understand the stakes, go back to 2016, when Microsoft published the Language Server Protocol. Before LSP, every code editor needed a custom integration for every programming language. 10 editors and 10 languages meant 100 separate integrations, the classic M times N problem. LSP collapsed that to M plus N. Write one language server, and it works in every compliant editor. The consequence was not incremental. Tooling for Rust, Go, and TypeScript became portable almost overnight, and the competitive advantage of any single editor's language support largely evaporated. ACP is explicitly modeled on that history. Same arithmetic, different layer. The Agent-Client Protocol was published by Z Industries in August 2025 under a permissive open-source license, with a public specification and reference libraries in Rust and TypeScript. Technically, it is unglamorous. JSON RPC 2.0 messages over standard input and output. The editor launches the agent as a sub-process and talks to it in structured messages. The spec defines session creation, streaming updates as the agent works, tool call permission requests routed back to the user, and file operations that pass through the editor rather than around it. That last detail is more consequential than it sounds, and we'll return to it. JetBrains has its own AI products. It ships Junie, its own coding agent, and AI Assistant, its own in-editor layer. Supporting ACP means WebStorm users can bypass both and plug in a competitor's agent through a documented interface the vendor does not control. Companies do not usually do this from a position of comfort. The plausible reading is that JetBrains concluded it cannot win the agent race outright and would rather remain the surface where developers work than fight for the model underneath. That is a defensible strategy. It is also an admission about where the leverage in this market now sits. ACP did not launch alone. Google's Gemini CLI was a launch partner with native support. Claude Code, Anthropic's terminal agent, is reachable through an ACP adapter, initially built by Z and now presented as an official bridge. And GitHub's Copilot tooling reportedly ships an ACP server mode of its own, which is the detail worth pausing on. GitHub is owned by Microsoft, whose Visual Studio Code is the direct competitor to the editors adopting this protocol. On the editor side, Z, NeoVim, and Emacs implementations exist alongside JetBrains. The pattern resembles LSP's early adoption curve almost exactly. Here is the design decision that carries the most weight. Under ACP, when an agent wants to read or modify a file, it asks the editor rather than touching the file system itself. The editor holds unsaved buffer state, so the agent sees what the developer actually sees. Every tool call that mutates something can surface a permission prompt and a diff before it executes. This is not a safety afterthought bolted onto a chat window. It is the control plane, and it belongs to the client, meaning the editor, and by extension the user, keeps final authority over what an autonomous agent is permitted to do. There is persistent confusion between ACP and Anthropic's Model Context Protocol, released in November 2024. They solve different problems and are complementary, not competing. MCP standardizes how an agent reaches outward, to databases, APIs, documentation, external tools. ACP standardizes how an agent presents itself inward to a human's editor, how it streams reasoning, requests approval, and renders changes. Google's agent-to-agent protocol, announced in April 2025, addresses a third axis, agents talking to other agents. Taken together, these are the early scaffolding of an interoperability stack, assembled piecemeal by rivals rather than by any standards body. The commercial implication is straightforward. If switching agents costs nothing but a configuration change, then no agent vendor can rely on friction to retain customers. They compete on capability, price, latency, and trust, and only on those. That is good for developers and structurally uncomfortable for anyone whose business model assumes a captive workflow. It also reframes what an IDE is for. If the intelligence is swappable, the editor's value becomes the surrounding environment, refactoring engines, debuggers, project indexing, version control integration. JetBrains has spent 2 decades building exactly that. Supporting ACP is consistent with defending it. Caution is warranted. ACP is governed by a single company, Z Industries, not by a neutral foundation. Open licensing is not the same as open governance, and the protocol remains young enough that breaking changes are realistic. Adoption by a vendor does not guarantee feature parity. An agent reached over ACP may expose less than the same agent inside its maker's own product, and Visual Studio Code, by far the largest installed base, has not committed to it. Standards win when the dominant platform either joins or is outflanked. Neither has happened yet. If confirmed adoption widens through 2026, that calculus changes. The signal to track is not marketing language. It is whether the largest model vendors keep their ACP implementations at parity with their proprietary integrations, or quietly let them lag, the classic method for killing a standard without ever opposing it. Watch also for governance moving to a neutral body. LSP took years to become inevitable, and it succeeded because the incentive to interoperate outweighed the incentive to enclose. Whether that holds for autonomous agents, where the underlying models are far more valuable than any language server ever was, remains genuinely open.